Hi, I'm Kathy with the Delafield Quilt Company, and today I'm going to show you how to make a couple drawstring bags. Okay, to make this bag you're going to need 5 fat quarters. It may seem like a lot for a bag, but that's because we also use a lining. So for the outer edge I use 3 different fat quarters. For the inside lining I use 2 matching fat quarters. So I've already cut my pieces, but now let's walk through what sizes we need. For the outer panel, we're going to have this middle piece, which is your biggest piece, and then you have the bottom one, which is the second biggest, and the last is going to be the top here that your drawstring is going to go through as well. So I've already pre-cut all the pieces that we need. For the big piece in the middle, you're going to need 2 10-inch by 18-inch rectangles. For the bottom panel, you're going to need 2 8-inch by 18-inch panels. For the top part, you're going to need 3 inches by 18 inches. So you might have noticed on my original bag, it's the exact same fabrics, it's just this one is dark fabrics. So I did this because I want to use this for a laundry bag for our camper. And if we have a light one, that's the lights go in there. And then the dark will be the dark clothing will go in here. And then for the line, you're going to need almost an entire fat quarter. And you need 2 of these, so they match here. And the size is going to be 18 inches by 20 inches. Okay, I'm going to start with the outer shell. And this, I think you'll find, will come together super quick. And I'm just going to sew my pieces together. So I'm going to lay them out. And I'm just going to sew them in this order. I'm going to sew 1 panel at a time. So bottom, middle, top. And when you're sewing, you just want to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all your pieces. Okay, now that I've got it all sewn, I'm just pressing the seams to one direction. I'm going to press one of the panels with the seams going down, and then the other panel with the seams going up. Before I move on to more sewing, I'm just going to make some marks where I'm going to sew the little channel for the drawstring. So we are going to mark, using your favorite fabric pen, 2 inches from the top, and that's going to be the top of the channel. And then we're going to use the seam for the bottom. So again, we're going to mark 2 inches from the top. And we're going to repeat that on the other panel. Okay, now we're going to sew the 2 front panels together, or the 2 outside panels. So you're going to want to just make sure that your seams are lined up. And I'm going to put some pins there. You also want to make sure that you know where that mark is that we just placed, because we are going to, when we sew the sides, we're going to sew up to this seam here, we're going to skip over that, and then start sewing again where our line was. So I'm just going to put one on the other side, so I know where to start and stop. And then repeat that on the other side before you sew. So when we go to sew this, we're only going to sew on 3 sides. We're going to start here at the top, sew down to our line, lift our needle up. You could cut the strings if you wanted to, and then we're going to start again right at the seam, and we're going to sew all the way down. Then we're going to go around the bottom, and then back up, again, skipping, starting at the seam, lift your needle up, and then go to where your mark was. So I'm going to go sew those edges. I'll be right back. Okay, now that I've got the bag sewn, I'm going to actually do a little more stitching just to make sure this opening is going to be okay. So I'm going to press the seams open just for this first probably about 4 inches, because then I'm going to do a little top sewing right along the opening just to make sure this doesn't fray with washing or use. If you want to, you could press open all the seams. I'm just going to leave them be because this is going to be a laundry bag. Okay, now that those seams are pressed, I'm then going to come back with my sewing machine, and I'm just going to do a top stitch along here, just kind of almost like a buttonhole kind of shape. Okay, the next part is to create your lining. And this is super simple. Right sides together, place your pieces, pin in a few places, and then you're going to just sew Leaving the top open, you're going to sew around the other 3 sides. You're going to use a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, now that I've got all 3 sides sewn, I'm going to actually leave it outside facing out. And then I'm going to take the outer shell. I'm going to turn that so it's right sides out. You could use a little tool if you want to get the corners out. We're actually going to stuff this inside the lining. So again, the lining, the inside fabric is on the inside. So your right sides will be together. I'm going to shove this in there. And then you're going to line up your seams, your outer seams. Line those seams up on both bags. Put a pin to secure that. Do the same on the other side. And then you're going to just line up the rest of the edges. And probably put a pin every 6 or so inches. And then one important step that I forgot to do earlier is I forgot to leave a gap on my lining fabric. That's going to be used to turn this inside out. So I'm going to grab my seam ripper and just make a gap there. Now I got my gap. Hopefully you don't make the same mistake I did. And now I am going to just sew a 1/4 inch again all along these joined top edges. Okay, now that I've got the top part all sewn, find that opening on the lining fabric and then use that to pull through the inside. Okay, we're going to close up that gap and I'm just going to do a top stitch, turning the seam allowance in on itself. I'm just going to top stitch to close that. Now that I have that stitch closed, is tuck that lining inside the bag. And then you want to make sure that your lining is fully down and that you just have the seam at the very top of the bag. Okay, then I am going to go back and I'm going to press this top band here. Okay, now that that's pressed, the next steps are going to be to sew on the line that we drew earlier, and you're going to make sure not to sew the bag shut. And then once we've sewn that, we're going to come back and then sew in the stitch right here where the top band meets the middle panel. Okay, now that I've got the top sewn, you can see that sewing in the ditch and sewing 2 inches from the top has created a channel that we're going to then insert whatever we're going to use for our tie or our pole. So to make that part, you could use ribbon or some other string, whatever you would prefer, but I've chosen to use some of the leftover parts of the fat quarters. You're going to need 4 pieces that are 2 inches by 18 inches. So then to sew it together, just right sides together, 1/4 inch seam to get one long big strip. Okay, so once you have your strips sewn together, you're just going to press the seams open. Okay, then I'm going to fold this piece in half first to get a nice center line to work with. If you have one of those bias making tools, you certainly could use that as well. I do not, so I'm just going to use good old folding and the iron. Okay, then on each of the ends, I'm going to fold in probably about a 1/2 inch. Press that again. Do the same on the other side. Okay, then we are going to fold each side into the center. And we're going to press that as well. Make sure when you get to your end, you're folding in that little flap just so you got a clean edge. Okay, almost done with this. Now I'm going to fold it back over so we essentially have a 1/2 inch width of bias tape. Okay, now that this is all done, I'm going to top stitch along the top to close that, along the length, and then also in the bottom. Okay, so your last step in making your laundry bag is to feed the string that you just made. You're just going to put a safety pin on one side. Find one of the openings on your bag. And you're going to feed that through, and then just use your fingers to feel the safety pin and scrunch it up and move it along to get it all the way through. Okay, once you get it all the way through, take your pin off. And if you wanted to, You could pull this other side out a little bit because I plan on using that as a loop. And I'm just going to tie that once just to get a loop out of this. Okay, there you have it. A simple, quick drawstring bag. Thank you for joining us today at the Delafield Quilt Company. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. Please subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more of our sewing projects, and visit us at www.delafieldquiltco.com. Thanks, have a great day.